You're listening to The Conversation. The day after Péter Magyar ousted Viktor Orbán as Prime Minister of Hungary, he gave a combative press conference. He was speaking in Hungarian, but talking to the world.
Hungary and the Hungarians wrote history yesterday on the 12th of April.
The night before, Magyar had stood on the banks of the river Danube in the capital, Budapest, in front of thousands of jubilant supporters. Now, he urged the Hungarian president to move swiftly to install him as prime minister before any more damage could be done.
We know that people have been destroying documents, just like in the old communist age, that shredders are working full-time.
During 16 years in power, Orban and his Fidesz party had managed to take control of many of Hungary's levers of power, from the judiciary to state-owned media, and then dismantled the institutions that could keep them accountable. Orban liked to call it an illiberal democracy. So how did Péter Magyar, a former member of Orban's own Fidesz party, manage to beat his former boss? And what does Magyar's victory mean for the European Union, where Orban was a belligerent, pro-Russian voice at the leaders' table? I'm Gemma Ware from The Conversation, a news and analysis platform partnering journalists with academics. Welcome to The Conversation Weekly, where experts explain how he ended up here. Today, how Viktor Orbán lost power in Hungary and the lessons his defeat has for other illiberal democracies. Zsolt Enyedi, you are a professor of political science at the Central European University based between Vienna and Budapest, and your research looks at Hungarian politics and illiberalism in Europe. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Zsolt, you're in Budapest right now. Describe for me what the last few days have been like since Viktor Orbán lost the election.
Incredible. Perhaps you have seen some images about the street party that went on across the whole night in Budapest. I have never seen anything like that. Crowds of people pouring on the street, cars honking, people dancing even on the top of buses at all kinds of high places. I just mentioned to someone that this is a kind of party we should have had when communism collapsed. And now, many decades later, we finally got our party.
Is there a sense of disbelief as well?
I think so. Obviously, those who supported Fidesz, they are sad. But there is a clear majority who enjoys this event as a one-in-the-lifetime experience, a regime change, quasi-revolutionary, but very peaceful and future-looking change.
You've been following Hungarian politics closely for decades. How would you describe this 2026 election?
Well, so Viktor Orbán is prime minister continuously for 16 years by now. Regime that he headed was extremely consolidated. It's a very stable, very well-designed regime that is formally democratic. And as we can see from this election, it has substantively democratic features as well, like you can topple the government if there is enough support for the opposition. But there are many, many features of this regime that put Hungary into the hybrid or grey zone category. So there is not real liberty when it comes to many aspects of life, and there is a very high degree of corruption. There is complete monopoly over the state public media and much of private media. And therefore, the election could have been simply one of the many ritualistic confirmations of the rule of Orban. And the fact that it hasn't turned out in that way, that it turned into such a radical change, is, to be honest, to some degree a surprise to most of us. We knew from opinion polls that the opposition has a lead, and we knew that that lead could and should lead to a change in government. But first, we were not sure whether we can believe our eyes. We suspected Fidesz to be able to mobilize its supporters, partly because it had much more money and partly because it could use tools of intimidation. And we suspected that even if the opposition wins, it will be a narrow victory and Fidesz will be able to obstruct the change. And as opposed to that, we seem to have a clear break.
And it was characterized a lot by misinformation, wasn't it?
Well, this is how the last 16 years can be characterized. The fact that Fidesz had a monopoly over many channels of communication, and the fact that the leaders of the regime had no inhibition whatsoever, meant that if you switched on the TV, you received many so-called facts that were completely baseless conspiracy theory. And that was very apparent, for example, during this election. Suddenly, the media presented us with the manifesto of the opposition party, TISA, 500 pages long program. And this program has been analyzed every single day by various experts on TV. And when TISA said that, I'm sorry, we have nothing to do with this program, not a single word is true. It was really like as if living in a fiction.
And then you had a visit from J.D. Vance as well, just in the last few days of the election.
Together, the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Hungary have been able to do amazing things. And we're here because we want to celebrate those amazing things. We want to build upon those amazing things.
So there was a lot of attention on this poll, this vote.
This was indeed an important election, and the connections between Trump administration and Orban are long-standing. Actually, Viktor Orbán was a Trump supporter before J.D. Vance became a Trump supporter. So there is really all kinds of collaborations. There were Fidesz politicians and experts playing a role in Project 2025, the blueprint for the second Trump administration. So it was justified that J.D. Vance came, that there are these post-liberal, illiberal, anti-liberal circles where both J.D. Vance and Orban are big players.
Orban has been replaced as Prime Minister by Péter Magyar, leader of the TISA party. Now, Magyar is a former member of Orban's Fidesz party, and he made his break with Orban back in 2024. He kind of made this explosive TV interview, didn't he? Can you tell me about that and how it helps us understand who Magyar is?
When we want to understand what has happened here, we have to go back to that interview and to the psychological context of that interview. So Peter Magyar was not a politician until 2024, but he was part of the Fidesz entourage. His wife, Judit Varga, ended up as being Minister of Justice. She was actually a very talented, successful Minister of Justice, and there was talk about her maybe even replacing at one point Viktor Orbán or becoming president or something like that. Peter Magyar, he was himself a civil servant in the Fidesz regime. He was socialized into this political subculture. So in 2022, the opposition lost badly. When that election ended with 2/3 majority for Fidesz, the opposition was extremely demoralized, extremely. People were contemplating leaving Hungary, and actually many did go. And then a scandal erupted.
Hungary's President Katalin Novak announced her resignation on Saturday after coming under mounting pressure for pardoning a man convicted for covering up a sex abuse case in a children's home.
There was a hunger for change, but there was nobody to be the flag bearer. And then Péter Magyar gave this interview.
Hát én azt gondolom, hogy ez egy abszolút saját döntése volt.
In which he said that the fact that his ex-wife, Judit Varga, had to resign as Minister of Justice who signed the pardoning decision by the president was unjust, that the real responsible actors for this scandal are not punished, that there are top Fidesz leaders who abuse their power, that there is a huge corruption in the system, and he, even though he is part of Fidesz as a party and belongs to that community, he is sick and tired seeing what is happening. And that was a sensation because up to that point, we haven't had a single person from Fidesz who dared to criticize Orbán's rule. So that particular interview was listened to by 2 million people in a less than 10 million country. And then he started organizing rallies. And tens of thousands of people went to these rallies basically because of this curiosity. So he realized this enormous hunger and he jumped on the bandwagon. He organized a nationwide movement. He started visiting countryside towns, organizing open-air gatherings. and everybody flocked there. He also criticized very strongly the opposition because they have clearly failed. They are actually the reasons why Orban can maintain its power. So his attitude to existing opposition parties was very hostile, which made him credible in the eyes of those who were disgruntled with both opposition and government. So he had a kind of populist vibe, but a populist person whose main goal, or one of the main goals, is the rule of law. So this combination made him attractive for citizens coming from various corners of the society, different classes, different religious backgrounds, different residents. So he became a kind of unifying figure. I would say that he's some sort of a center-right figure who has a couple of patriotic, or if you prefer, nationalistic attributes, bit of Euroscepticism here and there, some reservations against progressive way of speaking. He is probably more conservative than many of the Christian Democrats that you have in various European countries. Having said that, he has changed a lot. When he entered politics in 2024, he was clearly someone who reproduced many of the ideological panels of this Orbanist regime, but he was very critical of the corruption that exists in the regime. So he was a kind of clean version of Orban, a young version of Orban. And many people actually drew this parallel. He looked like Viktor Orbán himself 10, 15 years ago. But during the last 2 years, since he's on the campaign road, he has changed. He started to understand better the enormous harm done by the Fidesz regime, and he also became more pro-European in his rhetoric and embracing the democratization agenda. So by now, I think he's someone who is able to provide the lowest common denominator for all pro-democratic forces, whether socialist or liberal, conservative or Christian Democrat. And in that sense, he is more than simply representative of one political ideological current. He is someone who basically tries to dismantle a regime and hopefully allowing others to build this new regime.
Do you think Orban and Fidesz underestimated him? You say he was critical of the opposition, and yet of different people from different political spectrums came to vote for him, including the left. Did they underestimate what he was capable of, do you think?
Absolutely, absolutely. To be honest, I underestimated him. Everybody underestimated him. One of the reasons was we looked at his biography and we found it very problematic. And then we looked at his behavior, and that wasn't perfect either. After the interview, he declared that he knows that one of the top Fidesz politicians, who is member of the government, interfered into prosecutor's case in order to save himself and his cronies. He has evidence about this. And that was a conversation that he had with his own wife in the kitchen, which means that he has recorded his own wife a year or more earlier. You must have second thoughts about someone who records his spouse in order to achieve some political goals.
They were still married at that point.
Yes. I mean, it was a complicated relationship because they separated for a while, then they came back together. She accused him of being violent. So actually, that's another reason why he didn't look like a likely candidate.
How did he defend himself against that?
He had said he never mistreated her. Like, we didn't get a clear picture about the degree of violence. It was clearly a very unpleasant relationship, and he came through as a problematic figure in many regards. But the thing was that Hungarian citizens didn't believe much of what official propaganda said, and the public included Judit Varga, the wife, into the rank of propagandists. Those who sided with Magyar didn't believe her. But more importantly, there were many people who said it does not matter. We don't vote for Magyar because he's a nice person. We don't care what kind of person he is. We want regime change. We want to get rid of Orban. We want to get rid of this pro-Russian orientation. We want to get rid of corruption. And whether the person who delivers this to us is a good person or a bad person, it's besides the point.
Why didn't Orban's brand of illiberal populism, which has been so successful for the last 16 years, why didn't it resonate with voters this time round?
I think the fundamental reason is a lack of economic growth. Viktor Orbán stands for many things. One is a set of illiberal values, but he also stands for economic prosperity. Before he came to power, Hungary was in a very deep economic crisis. And during his reign, especially between 2013 and 2018, there was very robust economic growth in Hungary. And since then, this economic growth was meager, but you could blame COVID crisis, the Russian-Ukrainian war. But by 2026, we had no growth for about 5 years. And that's far too long. People started to feel that the regime is not functioning, is not delivering, especially when it comes to healthcare, that the conditions are appalling. And this rhetorical advantage that Orban had, partly because he's a good speaker and partly because he had this entire state apparatus behind him, helping him to make his case, that became less relevant once you realize that your salary is worth much less when you go to shop than before. So I think that was the fundamental reason. And then these moral scandals that I mentioned earlier came on the top. And finally, the fact that all the opposition vote was concentrated in one party made the real difference, because the Hungarian electoral system is extremely disproportional. It gives a huge bonus to the largest party, and this bonus always went to Fidesz because the opposition was fragmented. This time it went to Peter Magyar.
As European leaders congratulate Magyar on his victory, what does his election mean for Hungary's relationship with the EU? That's coming up after this short break.
What are you going to have? Can I have 2 pieces of mullet, please? A piece of sea perch and 8 whiting fillets, please, Pauline.
From a fish and chip shop in regional Queensland
I believe we are in danger of being swamped by Asians.
to the heart of Australian politics, this is the unlikely story of the country's most controversial minor party.
Are you xenophobic? Please explain.
For 30 years, One Nation and Pauline Hanson have been ridiculed, dismissed and shut out.
Gone. I don't like it. No, I don't. Never did.
Now, no one's laughing. One Nation continuing to surge in the polls.
Dramatic surge in support for One Nation.
The fringe becomes the mainstream.
This is the story of how a party built on fear and grievance thrived, died, and rose again to upend Australian politics.
Well, I'm back.
Hanson 2.0 is the serious, strategic, experienced, battle-hardened political operator that we see in the news today.
I'm Ashlyn McGee. This is The Making of One Nation from The Conversation, and you can search for it wherever you listen to podcasts.
If you're enjoying The Conversation Weekly, you may also enjoy a podcast from our friends at the Academy of Social Sciences in the UK. They're currently celebrating the release of the 10th series of one of the UK's most popular social science podcasts, The We Society with Will Hutton. Whether it's Richard Wiseman exploring the science of luck, Stefanie Hatch sharing healthcare stories, or Jan-Emmanuel Deneve on the World Happiness Report, the We Society with Will Hutton is the place to hear how social science research insights can inspire optimism, connection, and positive change. That's the We Society with Will Hutton, available on Spotify, Apple, and all major podcast platforms. Orban and his ministers have been openly hostile to the European Union in recent years. And just a few days before the election, Bloomberg had reported that Orban, in a conversation with Vladimir Putin, told him, "I am at your service," during a call back in October. But what can we read from this election result into what Hungarians actually think about the EU?
According to opinion polls, the majority of Hungarians have always been pro-EU. Actually, if you rank countries, Hungary belongs to that group of countries that are most pro-EU within the Union. But this hasn't manifested itself politically for a long time. Fidesz originally was itself pro-EU party and then slowly shifted to a hard Eurosceptic position because EU was not willing to tolerate the illiberalism and corruption in Hungary. Orban became not only Eurosceptic, but someone who kind of counts on the collapse of the European Union and already prepares for the future after the EU. This is paradoxical because he received large amount of money from EU and actually he built his regime based on EU money. But he likes to think globally and he thinks that the future belongs to China and to some extent to United States, and the European Union is not a relevant actor, and sooner or later there will be cracks in the leadership of EU that will lead to a very fundamental restructuring or even collapse. And this is why you don't have to care about what the EU elite thinks. They don't have any power, they don't have teeth. They can give speeches against you, they can scold you, but what else can they do? Now, EU started to sanction Orban and withhold money.
The European Commission is taking a heavy-handed approach towards Hungary. It proposes freezing 7.5 billion euros from the EU budget's cohesion funds, saying Budapest has not progressed enough in its reforms against corruption.
But it was not painful enough to force him to change course. He hoped that with external support coming from Russia, coming from China, there were also attempts at developing close ties with some Gulf states. He will have enough external support and there will be soon a change within the EU itself. And to the extent that he will be relevant in EU as the vanguard of the new leadership of EU, where Marine Le Pen, Geert Wilders, Meloni, the other Eurosceptic and populist parties of Europe will give the dominant faction. So this is what he counted on, and this is how he behaved. And Hungarians tolerated that because the understanding was that maybe you have to be tough against Brussels in order to get the best deal. And it's good to have someone who stands up for national interest, even if that leads to conflicts with the EU, because EU became too woke. It pursues this green agenda that makes no sense financially. Sooner or later, Westerners will also realize that this kind of ideas-driven behavior is untenable. And this became particularly obvious when Russia attacked Ukraine. Orban said that, just look at the map, Russia is bigger. What sense does it make to pour enormous amount of money and send weapons to Ukraine when Ukraine stands no chance? So this kind of very pragmatic way of thinking that basically dismisses any liberal, democratic and progressive norm. The majority sort of thought that the boss knows what is our interest. He will have his spectacular quarrels, but at the end of the day, we will stay as member of the European Union and enjoy all the benefits. And maybe this is something that has changed in the last couple of months, that the rift between EU and Orban became so apparent, and the closeness of Putin and Orban became so obvious that I think about 1/4 of the Fidesz electorate started to worry that this will lead to Huxit, that Hungary will leave EU, and this is not what they wanted. And this is where Magyar got the ex-Fidesz support.
European leaders have congratulated Magyar in the wake of his victory. How do you think he will approach Hungary's relationship with the EU and with Brussels?
Well, obviously, he will be a much more constructive partner, partly out of conviction, partly because he needs EU money, and he needs that money soon. So he cannot play games. He has to make a deal with the EU leadership. This doesn't mean that he will be an unproblematic partner. He will pick fights on some secondary issues. For example, issue of farmers. He's against Mercosur agreement, for example. He will not be in the front line of countries that help Ukraine. He will not support policies that he considers too politically correct or out of touch with reality. So it is not that Europe gained enthusiastic supporter. He will be positive. So this time when you had a member of the community who constantly used the veto option, that is over.
So Magyar, in the first 24 hours of being in power, he's asked the president of Hungary to resign. He's told Orban's cronies to get out.
In his speech, Magyar promised to dismantle the Orban regime and called for the resignation of state leaders appointed by Fidesz, whom he called puppets.
What do you think the future is for Fidesz and for Orban?
I mean, this belongs to the revolutionary line of these changes. As far as the president is concerned, he said two things. One is that, Mr. President, please immediately appoint me as Prime Minister, and immediately after you did that, resign. He is very, very radical in this regard. He asked the head of the Constitutional Court, the head of the prosecutor's office, the Supreme Court, all of them should resign.
What does it mean for Orban, though?
I don't know what will happen to him now. Clearly, he's in shock. He has the talent, he has the money, he has the network to lead a successful political enterprise in opposition. He has done that between 2002 and 2010. He is unlikely to be ever brought to justice because it's extremely unlikely that he has done anything that could be considered criminal in the ordinary sense of the word. But his daughter, his father, his best friend, they are all billionaires by now. So his immediate environment is in danger. And what happens there, that's the big question.
What lessons do you think other illiberal democracies should take from Orban's loss?
While we are jubilating now, it's very important that this regime was able to survive for 16 years within the European Union, which is supposed to be the most liberal democratic political structure globally. So illiberalism is a very, very serious possibility in the 21st century. The fact that this has been defeated shows that the fight against illiberalism has also solid foundations, that luckily there are people who care about whether a country is democracy or not. Unfortunately, they seem to care about this only when the attacks against democratic procedures are accompanied with some other issue. And in case of Hungary, this was economic problems. Whether illiberalism can be defeated only because it's illiberalism, I doubt. I'm afraid you need some additional arguments.
Well, thank you so much, Rod, for being on the show. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a great conversation. Thanks.
In 2025, Judit Varga, Péter Magyar's ex-wife, called his recording of their private conversation a betrayal. Betrayal is not an achievement, she said, especially not if it's a betrayal of our own family. Magyar defended making and releasing the recording, saying it was in the public interest, but has consistently rejected allegations of domestic violence, calling it propaganda against him. That's it for this week's episode of The Conversation Weekly. You can read more about the aftermath of the Hungarian elections on The Conversation, and we'll put some links in our show notes to further reading. Thanks too for this episode go to Mark Rusko-Lusto, a colleague of Zolt's at the Central European University, who we also spoke to. This episode was written and produced by Mend Marawani, Katie Flood, and me, Gemma Ware. Sound mixing is by Eleanor Brezzi, and our theme music is by Nita Saal. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us directly at podcast@theconversation.com. You can also sign up for The Conversation's free daily newsletter by clicking on the link in our show notes. The Conversation is a non-profit news outlet dedicated to sharing the work of academic experts with a wider audience. If you like what we do, please consider supporting us at donate.theconversation.com. And please do also rate and review the podcast wherever you follow us. Thanks for listening.
I was saved by God to make America great again.
An autocrat loves a crisis. A crisis is the way that they mobilize their base.
While America is under invasion from within, we're under invasion from within.
He's testing the boundaries of what he can get away with.
We should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military.
We've asked 6 of the world's preeminent scholars how we can measure the make of an autocrat. It's a recipe of sorts, tried and tested by the most infamous leaders in history.
Hugo Chavez in Venezuela.
Vladimir Putin in Russia.
Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler.
Viktor Orbán in Hungary.
He's basically bulletproof in terms of criminal prosecution.
Join us from December 29 as we explore Trump, the making of an autocrat, from The Conversation.